Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. I'm your host Terry. It is June 19th, 2023. It is Juneteenth. So happy Juneteenth to everybody. It's a national holiday. Markets are closed today, banks are closed, post office is closed. About 40% of the businesses in the country observe it. So I've talked to some people, they had to work today, other people had the day off. But if you're not familiar with it, I mean, you should be, because it's now a national holiday. But short story is, on this date in 1865, Union General Gordon Granger informed slaves in Galveston, Texas, that they were free, which is really insane. And shitty, but then what would you expect from a slave holder? But because the war had ended, like the South had surrendered for all intents and purposes back in April. Now some people say, well, the 42nd Texas militia was still fighting. Well, who cares, right? And by the way, what happened after the Emancipation Proclamation is that any territory that was in federal control, they're like, hey, we're the federal government, the president's freed the slaves, so there you go. But anyway, it's kind of a, I know people celebrate this date, but I kind of feel like it should just be kind of, I don't know, maybe a little just sobering. But anyway, however you celebrate it, that's cool. So happy Juneteenth to everybody. So a lot of people have asked me, not a lot, few, I don't want to exaggerate, but a few people have asked me, well, what do I think about some of the changes that are going on at Prime? And let me say a few things and then I'll get to the camera issue. So, Dennis Davis has taken over the safety department, and I don't know exactly what happened to Steve Field. I don't know if he retired. I don't know Steve. I don't know if he was retired, if they showed him the door. I don't know if he left to take another job. I don't know. I don't keep track of the guy. If you're on LinkedIn, maybe you can track him down that way. And by the way, just as an aside, I had this epiphany when I was driving yesterday, about DriveWise. DriveWise, like probably at least 50% of the time, DriveWise is like, says non-DriveWise way station, follow the road signs. And I've already said that I think that's one of the stupidest things they could put up, follow the road signs. Yeah, like that's a great idea. I wouldn't have thought of that, right? I like mocking DriveWise. But I gotta wonder about all of these technology changes, right? Like, I don't see DriveWise as some like game changer, some force multiplier. I don't see DriveWise as making my life better. In fact, especially with where my Qualcomm is mounted now, it's like way over on basically in front of the passenger seat. Like, I need a co-pilot just to monitor things. It's a distraction. And I don't care what anybody says. Anything that takes your eyes away from the road is a distraction. So, like I've said in the past, pre-pass was right up here where my peripheral vision would catch it, and all I needed to hear was a tone, and just out of the corner of my eye I see a color, red, green, hear the tone, right? I didn't have to look at it. I didn't have to read anything. I didn't have to turn my head to see what it says, right? And I can't make my Qualcomm come closer and be in front of me like I could if I had, like a navigation or whatever. So I just wonder sometimes, like we've had this system that worked, no one was complaining about pre-pass that I know of. And then all of a sudden we got DriveWise telling us, hey, slow down for this exit ramp that you're not even taking, right? Like who made money off of converting to DriveWise? Who are the decision makers? And I don't know, maybe it's Robert Lowe. But here's what I know from working with corporations over the years is when you see a company changing something, you got to ask, what's the incentive for that, right? Like, is the company saving money? Because here's the thing, a company could be saving money, but an employee at the company could still be getting kickbacks from the vendor. And companies that don't have really strong internal controls, that's it's like when you work someplace and you're like, why'd we do this? Like they say, follow the money. So anyway, let's talk about a lot of the changes that are going on. I mean, first of all, people who take jobs over, right, who get promoted, they often want to put their mark on things. They feel like, well, if I take this job over, especially if the previous guy got let go for some reason, and again, I don't know why Steve Field left Prime, but let's say that he was shown the door, encouraged to retire. Well, then his successor is going to be like, man, I got to up my game, right? And I've called the safety department in the past the accident department, because they're not concerned with safety. I don't care what you say, because I see all sorts of, every time I go to a terminal, I see all sorts of unsafe practices in the shops, by the jockeys driving around, speeding around with no lights on at night, with those moving trailers here and there, people riding on the outside of jockey wagons. I've seen people from security open trailer doors and just leave the trailer door unlatched, even though it's Salt Lake City and the wind's blowing like 40 miles an hour. I mean, I see all sorts of safety violations, right? I see it all the time, right? Because the culture of safety is really not safety. It's a culture of loss mitigation, okay? And no one's been in the trucking industry for more than 5 minutes is going to argue with that. Probably the safest company I was at was Knight, because Knight concerned itself with not only what happens on the road, but like at shippers, receivers. Knight's the only company that ever passed out like the ice spikes to make sure drivers didn't fall and get hurt. Probably because they had a lot of company drivers, but they would also promulgate information about wrecks. Like, we used to get monthly safety training, and it was always different, and they had videos, and it was pretty helpful. I saw a thing recently from some like industrial psychologist that basically said, if you do the same safety training over and over and over again, people just get, they just block it out. And I went to safety training, and it's the same freaking videos, 2 or 3 videos over and over and over again. If you stay at Prime for 30 years, you'll see those videos till they're worn out, right? And then what do? You get on the simulator, right? Everybody just checks a box. That's what passes as safety training. So anyway, let's get back to, why are changes happening? Well, maybe Steve Field left because he was resistant to change, or he wasn't doing enough. I don't know. But now we see all these different things. And if you notice, there was a message sent out by safety talking about personal conveyance violations being down. Well, when you focus on anything, it's going to fix it. But if you're focused on one thing, it's like, if you ever, like, we have chickens at home. Have you ever had all your chickens get out of the chicken holding area, the chicken prison or whatever? Man, you get one back in, get two back in, and then while you're turning around, the two that you put in escape, and yeah, you got to close the gate. I know that. But my point is that when you're focused on one thing, all sorts of other stuff slips. And, that's not building a culture, because then when the people that are in charge are focused on it, then everybody else is focused on it. So first it was personal conveyance, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I hear that everybody's going to be on the system after a while. I'm still not impressed with this effort. And then and they also mentioned CPAP compliance. And here's the thing, that started to jump out at me. I'm like, this is all about the numbers, right? It isn't about anybody's safety. It isn't about whether I live or die or get injured on the job. It's about the numbers, right? And so the personal conveyance violations, right, that was hurting the CSA score. Although I will say this, I was talking to my son about CSA score, and what I was saying is that it wouldn't surprise me to learn that the vast majority of mathematical damage to the company's CSA score comes from a very small percentage of all the drivers. And the reason I say that is because, if you have a clean inspection, it doesn't help the CSA score, it just doesn't hurt it. But if one person is out in left field, right, and they got all sorts of problems, including, violating PC, then all that stuff just piles on. So one person can accrue a butt ton of violations, and each violation has CSA points associated with it. So for instance, if somebody had, and this is what I was taught when I drove trucks that had 18 tires, right? If you have 4 tires that are below 90 PSI, let's say you have 4 tires at 88 PSI, right? You got 18 tires, right? 4 is not a lot. It's not even 25%. But guess what? Each one of those counts as a flat or underinflated tire. So you could see if an inspector wants to tee off on somebody, every single thing is CSA points, right? And so it wouldn't surprise me that those people that are getting PC violations are also getting other stuff. Like if you get pulled over for speeding and then you also get a PC violation because you're running to the shipper because you're late, and then you have a light bulb out, man, that's going to be a butt ton of points, or you get pulled over because you aren't wearing a seatbelt and you were on your cell phone when you went into a weigh station. It doesn't matter how good the material condition of your truck is. It doesn't matter if it'll pass a DOT inspection. You just piled up a butt ton of points. So anyway, those points and reducing the company's CSA score is probably one of the things that, the current safety administration was tasked with doing, okay? And, again, people want to feel like they're contributing. They want to make their mark. Now, let's talk about cameras. I actually was surprised to learn Prime is the first company that I've been affiliated with, and I don't want to say worked at because I don't technically work for Prime. But I'm the first company I've been around, trucking company, that doesn't have forward-facing cameras in its trucks. Like, it's kind of like way not keeping up with technology, okay? But then again, we still have Qualcomm and whatever that system is that's the logs. I mean, that's a joke. okay? But so I think that outward facing cameras, the fact that they don't have them is really surprising to me. But let's talk about these inward facing, driver facing cameras, right? So I have some experience with them. And I've been at 2 companies where we had driver facing cameras. The first company was J&R Schugel, and of course they don't tell you about that when you're being recruited, but who cares, right? They don't tell you about a lot of stuff, right? You got to know to ask the question. But at Schugel, the cameras were not an option. Suck it up, right? If you don't like it, leave. Although I think Schugel has horrible retention. I know they didn't retain me. Now, I had an incident one time where I did a hard stop because I was trying to make a right-hand turn up in the Twin Cities area, and I cranked it. I had a KW, a T680. I cranked it around, but it just didn't come back as quickly as I, make the right turn as quickly as I'd hoped. So I was about to hit a road sign that was in like this little curb median. So I just kind of slammed on the brakes. And then I just, checked my mirrors. I backed up a little bit and kept going. But like my Peterbilt, I had a visor. I had 3 visors. And so the center visor was down, and because it was pretty early in the morning, I'd had a pre-dawn delivery. So by the time I got going, I was like, sun was coming up. So that's why I had my visor down. Then I get a nasty gram from safety, and they're like, you can't put your it's from this lady in safety, not the safety guy. She's like, you can't have your visors down. That's against company policy. I'm like, huh? And I was like, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Not really, but it was pretty stupid. I'm like, how can you have a policy against using something that helps the driver be more safe? She's like, and if you don't like it, basically talk to the fat guy with the beard that's running safety. I'm like, okay. So I call this guy up. He's like, all right, let me see what this looks like. Oh yeah, so you hit a sign. I didn't hit anything. I stopped suddenly, to avoid a collision. Well, he goes, I could see you had your seatbelt on. I could see your dog, because they could see part of me, like from the chest down or whatever. And he goes, look, you can use your visor, but just don't have the visors down at night. I guess they were concerned about, people falling asleep or whatever. Although my wife reminded me one time about how I faked her out while I was driving that I was asleep. But anyway, so that was that company. And then the second company that I was at was GP Transco. GP Transco had, they kind of had a unique way of doing things. And I've talked about this in a video quite a while ago. But GP Transco basically was like, hey, we have these driver-facing cameras. But if you want to, you can cover them up. But if you uncover them, we'll pay you an extra 2 cents a mile. But if you have an incident, we're going to make you uncover it. And if we're paying you the 2 cents a mile and you have an incident, well, then we're just not going to pay you the 2 cents a mile anymore. So, GP Transco kind of gave you the option, and I was like, I don't really care about the cameras, and I'll take the 2 cents a mile, right? And and I even in the video kind of added up what it would pay me over the course of the year. So, and these cameras, the ones that GP Transco had were Samsara cameras. And Samsara was also the company that we had our ELD with. So our ELDs were on our mobile devices, and the company also issued us tablets. We didn't have any of this Qualcomm nonsense, bull crap. We just used different systems. Samsara was run by, I'll just say it, they were younger, better looking people than we have at Prime, and they were tech savvy. My fleet man or my driver manager was actually in Lithuania, in Vilnius, but communications were great. I've said it before. I liked being a GP Transco, but they did have driver-facing cameras. Now, some people were like, "Oh, man, you're giving up your rights, blah, blah, blah." Now, here's where it gets a little confusing, okay? And I need everybody to pay attention here. There's two things that you need to think about when we're talking about driver-facing cameras and just surveillance of an employee at any given time, right? And I'm an independent contractor. It's kind of weird, but I am driving under Prime's authority. But let's talk about the technology for a second. And let me say this. Actually, let me back up. Let's talk about the law for a second. Okay? Courts across America have said it over and over again that employees have no reasonable expectation of privacy at their place of employment, okay? In other words, wherever you are, and by the way, I've never heard about anybody complaining about cameras in the terminals, but everywhere you go into Prime terminals, there's cameras. Just saying, look around, okay? I'm sure there are cameras in the parking lots. I would assume there are. I'd be shocked if there aren't. But anyway, the technology exists to monitor us constantly, okay? And the company candidly could put cameras in these trucks surreptitiously and not have them even be obvious, okay? Now, the AI, the funny thing is about the AI, they're like, "Oh, well, we could see if you're not wearing your seatbelt, or we could see if you're on a cell phone." The funny thing is, these cameras typically work when there's an incident, like I mentioned, my hard stop, right? Like, they're not watching you, when you're, asleep. I mean, and candidly, I leave my curtains open all the time. I don't care. I'm like, if somebody wants to watch me in, getting in bed or in my skivvies or scratching my butt, I don't really care, man. That's their problem, not mine. I would, I mean, if they're watching me, I would like to get some money from it, but that's, that's a different kettle of fish. But here's the thing. I don't really care that they're watching me while the truck's moving, okay? I assume somebody's watching me while the truck's moving all the time, whether it's, cameras when you go in a weigh station, and lots of states have them. I don't know if everybody knows this, but there are cameras all over freeways in different parts of the country where they're just constantly keeping track of every license plate that goes by. I mean, if you go around Atlanta, they know where you are, right? There's cameras all over, what is it, 285? I know that from watching like cop shows, detective shows. They're all over the place. So, and honestly, I don't know how good this AI is, and I'll tell you why. Because I always have a fridge in my truck, and I always have cans of Diet Coke in it. And I swear, I can't do it now because the fridge opens a different way. It's got a left-hand hinge on it. But all my other fridges had right-hand hinges, and I would totally reach back there and get a soda. Now, I wouldn't take my eyes off the road or my left hand off the steering wheel. I've never had any mishaps because of it. I don't take my seatbelt off to do it, but I do lean back there and get a soda. And never once when I had driver-facing cameras did anybody ever say anything about it. So I don't know if AI is programmed for Terry reaching back to get a Diet Coke. But but that's what you got to understand, right? Like these changes, are they really, are they enough to make you want to leave? And the answer is, at least for me, probably not. But here's the solution if you really want to do that. I still think Prime is a good company. They have a lot of shortcomings. I think part of the reason they have a lot of shortcomings is because they have a lot of people that are running things that have been running things for years and years and years, and they're what I would call ossified, which means they're just like, calcified water. It's just a buildup, and it's just kind of becomes stone after a while. And the thing is, they're not that innovative, okay? Just look at Qualcomm, And, I said something about web-based stuff, for ELD, and they're like, no, there has to, this was from logs, there has to be a cord going into the engine compartment so people can't cheat. I'm like, that's not going to prevent cheating if somebody really wants to cheat, but whatever. And so I guess, change is inevitable. Human beings are conditioned to resist change. And a lot of people resist everything, even when it's in their own best interest. Now, I'm not saying the cameras are. I'm just saying people generally resist change. And, if the change bothers you, but you like doing what you do at Prime, get your own authority and just be an A-fleeter. I don't know how that would work. I mean, I do know this: A-fleet, they don't obey Prime's rules. They do their own thing, right? They have their own insurance. They can hire drivers that Prime rejected. They can run the speed they want to run, whatever, right? They do their own thing, and they just contract with Prime like somebody that is just power only. So anyway, I wouldn't overreact. The other thing I will say about this is it is going to be really a big job to backfit thousands and thousands of trucks with camera systems. I want forward-facing cameras because my camera doesn't always work right, and so I want forward-facing cameras in my truck because I'm confident that I'm not doing, anything wrong. And by the way, the forward-facing cameras are a great tool because when I was a new driver and I was at night, my driver manager, like when I would go when I would come back home and I would go in the terminal, my driver manager was a guy named Paul, and he was totally cool. He'd be like, "Hey Terry, are you coming home? You're coming on home time?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Hey, can you do me a favor when you get back? If I'm here, can you just stop in and talk to me for a minute?" And I would go in there, and he would be like, "Hey man, you had this incident. I just wanted to show it to you and just get your thoughts." And he would pull it up on his computer, and he'd have a video of what my truck did. He's like, "Hey, you were too close to that person," blah, whatever it was, right? Like he'd ask me about it, and I'd tell him what I was thinking, not making an excuse, just, hey, what was going through your head at the time? It was a good teaching tool. So I'm down with the forward-facing cameras. I think if you're a safe driver, it is nothing but helpful, and it protects you. It really does. And candidly, on the driver-facing cameras, I'm just not going to get my panties in a twist about it because I've already been at 2 companies that had them. I don't really care. And people say, well, you're letting them chip away at your civil liberties. And that's what I've tried to explain to people over time, in the past. I have very few civil liberties at an employer, right? The Bill of Rights is basically out the door at employers. An employer can tell you, regardless of the law in the jurisdiction you're in, you can't bring a gun into work onto their property, right? Because the Bill of Rights, I know people freak when they hear this, but it doesn't apply to private individuals and private companies, right? It applies to the government, right? The government can't suppress your right to free speech. The government can't suppress your right to free exercise of your religious beliefs. The government can't suppress your right to own a gun. The government can't quarter troops at your house, or kick your door in without a search warrant, or search your car without probable cause or a warrant. But guess what? When you drive your car on your company's property, I guarantee that you have given up the right to be free from a search of your car if they want to. And you go through inbound, Prime could walk out there to some prime security dude could walk out there and say, I want to search your truck. And guess what? You would have a couple of options. One is you could say no, and then they could terminate you right there on the spot. Or two, you could say yes and let them search your truck. Now, would that piss people off? Sure would, but it's legal. And it's the same thing with watching people while they're working. When you're in this driver's seat, I've even heard people say if you're in the driver's seat and the engine's running, you got to be on duty. That's a misreading of the rules. But when you're driving down the road, you're definitely at work, and they can watch you. And and here's the thing, right? Like, what are you going to do if you go to another company and right after you get there, they put cameras in the trucks, right, facing the driver? I mean, and again, there's a way around this. Get your own authority, have your own truck. But a lot of people don't want to do that, can't do that, or it would just be, cost prohibitive, to do that. I mean, there are a lot of advantages to the... Dude, you're going to collide. Freaking dude's looking backwards while moving forward, and he almost hit this truck that was driving by. But you're gonna, I lost my train of thought a little bit, but I basically like the Prime system because it takes work off my plate. That's the bottom line for me. There are things that would make me leave Prime, but it wouldn't be, surveillance, because I assume that I'm being surveilled most of the time anyway. I just don't worry about it. So anyway, I don't know if that, I'm sure my opinion's not going to be popular with people, but if you feel strongly enough about it, then vote with your feet. Go to another company, go to a smaller company maybe that thinks that that's a bad idea. I don't know. I mean, you just be careful what you wish for, right? The grass isn't always greener. And by the way, even if they start this, I've said this before, but in less than 8 years, I'd like to stay at Prime about another 8 years, 7 years and 11 months actually. Then I'm leaving. I'm done. How fast they could implement this, I don't know. But I would say that it would take, given how overwhelmed our shops are, I think if they made the decision today, right, to put cameras on every truck, even outward-facing cameras, they would not have every truck, transitioned by the end of the year. They wouldn't. They don't have enough time to do that. So, that's the thing, right? Like, I don't know if Dennis Davis is writing checks that he, can't be cashed by Prime, maintenance or whatever. And I think they may find out that the cost is enormous. There might be problems getting the technology, right? Because of chips or whatever. I don't know. but it's not something that's like, you know, right in front of me right this second that I'm even going to worry about. And again, I don't care. I just don't care. So anyway, I hope that clears a few mysteries up. People understand what the law is, what technology looks like, you know. I mean, like I said, if they could drill a little tiny hole, they can put a camera in it. I mean, there are cameras that are the size, the lens is the size of a head of a pin. You know, the technology exists to surveil people. And honestly, I don't know that, you know, like if they're like, oh, we saw you falling asleep. Well, first of all, the truck's dark, right? If it's at night. So what if they did, right? I mean, you know, lots of people doze off, you know. Now, if you're using your phone, and by the way, I see people using truck drivers. It's amazing how, like, blatant. I went by this driver. He was actually, it was a U.S. Express truck, I think maybe a variant cab. This dude was hunched over the wheel. He was going like really slow. I passed him in Maryland, but he had a phone up to his ear. I'm like, what the fuck? You know, it's not 1997, dude. Just get a, you know, a headset or whatever. I was like, man, it was like so blatant. And I've seen it before, you know, in broad daylight, you know, very obvious stuff. But anyway, I digress. But take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.